Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and get started now. One of the hallmarks of Dr. Paul's campaign, one of the hallmarks of Dr. Paul's campaign has been his plan to restore America, and the most famous part of the plan has been the proposal to cut $1 trillion and eliminate 5 cabinet secretary departments. However, there are lots of other wonderful things in the Restore America plan that would really immediately create jobs here in Nevada and across the country. And there are also many things that we've heard talking to Nevadans about the ways that Dr. Paul could address problems that are very germane and very important to Nevadans. And Dr. Paul has put together another plan that will really tackle some of these very, very important issues. Dr. Paul's here to talk about these. So with no further ado, Congressman Paul.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to come here for the press conference and present some of the ideas I have for changing the economy, not only of Nevada and Las Vegas, but of the whole country, because the whole country is in trouble economically speaking. Sometimes I've been criticized, in the media, and maybe justifiably, that I sound more like an economic professor than I do a politician. But the whole thing is, if you have an economic problem and you turn it over to the politicians, what should the expectation be that the politicians are going to solve the problems by being politicians rather than thinking in economic terms? We have to think in economic terms. But our problems have started a long time ago, at least subtly, all the way back to 1913 with the beginning of the destruction of the currency. But a major change occurred 40 years ago, 1971, when unlimited credit became the policy of this country, which meant that it would accommodate unlimited spending. So the most current crisis that we face now has been building since 1971. Now, the beginning of that correction actually occurred in the year 2000, and the market finally had been exhausted, and it couldn't be propped up by just printing money and spending money, running up debt, and just trying to regulate the problems that they've created. So in the year 2000, we had the NASDAQ bubble collapse because the NASDAQ was way out of control. There was way too much speculation because of the excessive credit. But it was papered over because then again the monetary authorities decided that there would be a housing bubble to replace the NASDAQ bubble. And that seemed to work, but the truth is the standard of living and real jobs have been going down ever since the year 2000. We've had a 30 million increase in population since the year 2000, and essentially no new manufacturing and productive jobs. And we've been consuming wealth during this period of time. So although it's very easy to look at the housing crisis in Nevada and in particular Las Vegas and say that is the issue, all we have to do is wave a wand, give somebody some money and solve the housing trouble. It isn't the answer. You have to answer the question where the bubble came from. And we have to talk to those individuals who understood the bubble, predicted the bubble, and explained that it was coming. But essentially, bubbles are formed by excessive credit. In a free market, credit and capital should come from savings. But we haven't done that for decades. They had this fictitious belief that if you didn't save, it didn't matter because all we had to do is create new money out of thin air and pass it out to the special interest, and it would dribble down and help the middle class. Well, it didn't help the middle class. It destroyed jobs. It has shrunk the middle class, and now the middle class and the poor are suffering. And all those programs that were designed for houses, the people have lost their houses. But it cannot exist without the Federal Reserve creating credit out of thin air, usually understood to say interest rates should be low because it benefits everybody. Yeah, everybody except the savers. It benefits the spenders. It benefits the people who get the money first. The governments and Wall Street and the banks, they benefit, but by the time the money circulates, the tax falls on the middle class and on the people, and the people end up suffering because they pay higher prices and suffer the consequences. But the excess of credit, it has been there, and that's the real culprit. But also programs that were well-intended, the Community Reinvestment Act. This was designed to say, well, some people don't quite qualify, but they deserve a house too. And maybe if we put a little force on the bankers to make bad loans, this would really, dribble down and everybody's going to have a house. So the principle that everybody has a right to a house regardless of their income and how responsible they are and whether or not they have a down payment, all of a sudden would produce magic. And it seemed to work because a lot more people had houses. High percentage of people had houses. But guess what? When the crisis came, they were the first one to lose their houses. The banks got bailed out, and the people we were supposed to be helping lost their jobs and lost their houses. So the government program, whether it's with the inflation or whether this affirmative action program of saying you must give people, even if they aren't qualified, to have a loan. This is the setting. This is the reason you end up with bubbles. Then on top of this, we had the corrupt way that credit was allocated through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac should have been the first organizations to go after this bubble broke. But the administrators of Fannie Mac and Freddie Mac are still there. They're still making big salaries, and they got billions of dollars of bailout, and they're still in the business of doing the same thing that caused the housing bubble. So we still have the Fed. We still have this pressure to make certain loans. We still have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we have not allowed the liquidation of debt. We have not allowed the banks that overextend themselves to go bankrupt and get the debt written off the books. Instead, the debt has been transferred to us, to the people, and under those circumstances, you can't expect a recovery. And that's why we have to understand basic economic policies. During the decade or so before the housing bubble collapse in 07 and 08, I had introduced legislation to remove the line of credit to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had a line of credit to the Treasury. So no matter what they did, they were going to get a bailout. It was a guarantee of a bailout. And I always knew that the Fed would always come to the rescue. So there was the moral hazard that they were too big to fail and they were going to take risks as long as they were making money, and they did. They kept taking risks. And the tragedy of it, they were right. They got the bailout. And we haven't changed that, and that's what we have to change. We have to change it. So one of the most immediate things that we have to do if we want to correct it is no more bailouts. That's what we have to do. But there have been times in our history where monetary policy precipitated a crisis like this, and the government wasn't attuned to the fact that they had to buy up all the debt. 1920, 21, the debt just dissipated, and people don't even remember the Depression, and it was over in a year. But today it's quite different, so we have to see what we can do to give more incentives. And one is that we could adjust the tax codes. Through the tax codes, we can give tax credit. They've expired for first home buyers. Give them a tax credit. Give them an incentive to get some of their money back. What about adjustment on these mortgages? There's no incentive for the mortgage companies to come and adjust the person that's holding the mortgage because they figure they're going to do better if they hold out because the moral hazard is still there. They figure, oh yeah, we're too big to fail. They'll bail us out again. Nothing has changed. They have no incentive to make a deal with the people that are underwater. So I would say we remove the effort to bail out and they give the people a tax benefit if they do work something out. So if the value of the house goes down, give them some type of a tax credit or tax benefit. And even if it's a lot of money, give it to them over 5 years. And they would have like no taxation for a while in order to get their money back. So this would be a boost, to the effort to wind this down. But as long as the bailout is there, and as long as the banks and the holders of these mortgages believe they're going to get a better deal than making a deal with the people who hold the mortgage, it's not going to occur. The real problem and tragedy is this has been so globalized because our banks have branch banks in Europe, and it's the derivatives market that is so much out of control, and that stuff should be eliminated and wiped off. But we're doing exactly the opposite. Bernanke has been overseas, our Treasury official has been overseas, and we're guaranteeing that we're going to bail out the euro, and we're going to bail out their banks. Their banks are our banks, and those banks are owning Greek debt and Spanish debt, and we're in hock for this. And as long as that is the case, they're going to keep borrowing and borrowing until we bail them out. But how can we bail them out? We've been downgraded once. We're going to get downgraded again. How are we going to bail out the world? So this is why we have to have a sensible approach. We cannot correct this until we admit the truth, that we've spent too much money, we're too much in debt, and we ought to cut some spending, a lot of it. Unfortunately, there's not a serious effort in Washington. There's not a serious effort by any of the candidates to actually cut. The only thing that they've talked about is cutting spending on the proposed increases. They have proposed baseline increases of $9 or $10 trillion over the next 10 years. So they don't act responsibly. There's a super committee that super flopped, and then the automatic cuts are over the next 10 years starting in 2013. So there's no cuts. Nobody can tell people, Congress, what to do in 2013. So why should the markets be reassured that we're going to get our budget in order? It's just not going to happen unless we realize to get out of this mess, we have to rein in the spending. And we have other people proposing, and even the president today had a proposal. He said, oh, it's not a big deal. It costs between $5 and $10 billion, but it's more of the same. You know, more government regulations in there, and they think that the mistakes made by the artificially low interest rates can be taken care of by just more regulations, more Dodd-Frank, more medical legislation, more Obamacare, more Sarbanes-Oxley. These are all regulations that are costing trillions of dollars in order to correct the mistakes of the government. So they make mistakes, oh, we have to correct them, so they have another program of regulations, and we've been doing that. You know, when Enron failed, the Republicans were in charge, and they gave us Sarbanes-Oxley, and that has cost essentially $1 trillion since that time, and Dodd-Frank is estimated to cost $1 trillion, and who knows what Obamacare is going to cost if we don't repeal that. We cannot... We cannot solve our problems by doing more of the same thing that created our problems. We have to have more faith and confidence in what the free market gives us, what sound money is all about, why we ought to live within our means. I have been convinced for decades that if a country is just like an individual, if you live beyond your means and you live on borrowed money, eventually you're going to live beneath your means. And that's where we are today. We're starting to live beneath our means because all we have is debt, and we have no incentive to get our business people to act responsibly again. Matter of fact, a lot of many international businesses, including ours, have a lot of cash, but they're overseas. But we're going to penalize them if they come home. We penalize them with over-regulation and over-taxation. Matter of fact, there's one area where we penalize bringing money back. One way we could solve this problem is just lower the taxes. You know, if they've already paid taxes to a foreign government, just let them bring their money home. Maybe they'll invest it here in this country. One proposal I have made, and I made this 4 years ago, was very popular, and actually I worked behind the scenes in Washington and was not successful. But this is a city that could benefit rather quickly from one little proposal. Make sure that the United States government does not tax tips at all. Just think, I hope that would mean there'd be less paperwork for both the businessman and the person providing the services. No, why? You know, the person making a tip and making a living, I say they're working on the margin. That might be their full-time job, and that might be on the margin. They need every penny. And also, there might be somebody that is a second job. This might be a student. So here we are, we have students struggling. They want to pay their way through college, and we want to encourage them. So we tax their tips, and then they come up short, and then we say, oh, what we need to do is give you a loan and put you further into debt. It makes no sense. So, there's another area that could help the city rather quickly, but it would help everybody in this country, and that is we've overreacted to the visitation privileges of foreigners coming to our country. We want people to come out to our country. They're rich. They can come here and spend their money here in Las Vegas. That would be a good idea. But we're losing the conferences, not only in this state and this city, but around the country, because TSA doesn't invite people to come in. That scares people away. They get prodded and x-rayed and all these things. But it's hard to get the visas. And we need more resources to have a much more efficient service for visas, as well as our immigration policy. And we could have more resources by saving money elsewhere. I'm not going to vote for anything that's going to add to the debt. But I would... But I would vote for things if we get the money elsewhere. Now, my proposal is that if we need more immigration services and more efficiency there, why don't we save money elsewhere? You know, if you needed $1 billion for something, why don't we should have canceled $1 billion in building the embassy in Baghdad. If the American people, I don't think the American people would vote to spend money. And right now it's going to house 17,000 people, and they say we've left Iraq. But no, what we need to do is that we could save $1 billion here, there, and there, put half of it to the deficit, and put the other half into the programs that we need here at home is what we need. Also, if we look at the wars that we're fighting and the efforts that we are to try to figure out even where the boundary is between Iraq and Pakistan, Pakistan and Afghanistan, we don't even know where the borders are, and we're spending not only billions of dollars, trillions of dollars of debt has been increased in these last 10 years. I would say that if we spent less money worrying about everybody else's businesses, everybody else's borders, and more about our own and our immigration policies, we'd be a lot better off. I want to close with a point about where I come down on the efforts made by states, the responsibility of states versus the federal government. Then we are going to be able to take some questions from the press. But there was an effort been going on now. I'll bet you it's been 20 years that it's been going on, and that is that the 49 states decided that Nevada should be a dump for nuclear waste. I strongly oppose that and have always voted against that, and do not. Matter of fact, I'd like to see as much federal land as possible returned to the states, who should be in charge of their own state property. But if we're going to see a revival of our economy, we have to have a clear understanding of monetary policy, property rights, contract rights, give up this confidence that the government is our salvation, that we believe that they can make sure everybody has a house. We have to understand, if we're true humanitarians and care about the wealth and the prosperity of the middle class, we have to give up on the idea that the government is responsible and can do anything about it. Only freedom can answer those questions, free markets and property rights. that sounds like a good place to take a pause and take some questions from the press.
We have a mic that's circulating, so Allison we'll just go down the row here. We'll go down the row in the back. We would remind all of our friends and guests please just be patient with us, and we are going to keep the questions just for the reporters. Go ahead, right here, please.
Well, you mentioned the plan for tax-free tips. You mentioned the tax-free tips. Given that there are 300,000 Nevadans who work in the service industry, wouldn't an increase in the federal minimum wage do more or be more reliable?
She said, wouldn't it be a better way just to raise the minimum wage and they could get the same amount? Well, no, I don't like that idea at all. Because I don't like to use force, and that's what you're doing. You're forcing a contract. The government's supposed to protect contracts, not dictate the contracts. So if they can manipulate the minimum wage laws, they can manipulate the maximum wage laws. In 1971, they put controls on maximum wages. They put on wage controls. And of course, when you have use of force, you might force wages higher than the market would be, and you discourage people coming in at the ability of what they can produce. So when it gets out of control, guess what? We price our products out of the market, and just look at what we've done to our industry. That's one of the reasons why our businesses go overseas. So I think the voluntary approach is just let the people keep their money. If they get a good tip, they'll work harder and get a bigger tip.
Today, Ms. Robbins made some comments about the very poor in our culture, and I want to hear what you thought about those comments. Or you said you wasn't very concerned about it. What do you think the proper role of the federal government should be in taking care of the poorest members of our society? And are there any programs you would eliminate?
Well, he asked what is the proper responsibility of the federal government to the poor? That is maximize freedom, because that's where you get maximum productions and the maximum employment. But you know, I didn't see the full text of what Governor Romney said. I don't know what he said. Sometimes we as politicians get taken out of context. But quite frankly, he is my political opponent, and we don't agree on a whole lot. But I also think not too long ago, he was taken out of context that he liked to fire people, which was completely out of context. So until I look at that, I give him the benefit of the doubt, because quite frankly, I don't think he would come in here and say, you know what, I don't care about the poor people. I mean, that seems to be an overstretch. But if we truly care about the poor people, we will care about freedom, because the maximum middle class only comes about, and we experience it. We had the biggest middle class and the richest middle class, and we've given up on it because we've given up on our confidence and understanding how a free market and sound money economy works.
I'm curious, if you eliminate tax on tips and you extend a new tax credit for first-time home buyers, wouldn't both of those add to that?
Well, he said I'm not going to vote to increase the debt, but he's suggesting that if we don't tax tips, it might contribute to the debt. But that's not an expenditure. That is based on the assumption that if we give you back some of your own money, it's a cost to government. That's not a cost to government when you get to keep what you've earned. But I'd be willing to say that if I had my way and I had my druthers, I would pay for it in the sense that I would cut a lot more spending overseas so that we didn't go further into debt. But giving back people their own money is not a cost. That is not a contribution to the debt. The debt is created by spending too much money, not because we don't allow you to keep all your money. So I would look at that quite differently.
Brought up the issue of tourism, and you mentioned elements like the TSA and trying to remove barriers to tourism, but in Washington, it's pretty much been a bipartisan effort for the last year or so that you also have to do a lot of promotion for tourism. Would there be any place for that to increase tourism in the United States in your economic plan?
Would there be, I think the basic question is, would I support the promotion of the tourist industry by sending them money? No, I wouldn't do that. I don't think that's the responsibility of one group of taxpayers to support the other ones. Which ones are you going to support, and why should you transfer the money? I think we need to get out of the way so people can make the money and get the hindrance of these visas and get the disapproval and the disagreement that we have with the TSA. People just don't like to go through that. And the travel agencies have had a lot of suggestions of how we can streamline visas, and we should work on that. But people who want to advertise should advertise. One group shouldn't get paid government advertisement and somebody else. Besides, the advertisement will be distributed to their friends. It would be political rather than just general, because all of a sudden you have a mixture of big business and big government, and that leads to trouble almost always.
Congressman Paul, President Obama's recent reduction in defence spending from a two-war strategy to a one-war preparedness strategy seems to me the greatest structural downsizing of the American military in recent times. Would you commit to continuing that? And does President Obama's actions in that make him closer to your position than you are to your Republican?
He's talking about whether I would agree and continue the downsizing that Obama has started to talk about. But when I see one nickel cut out of the military budget, then I will become more interested. He's talking only about cutting some of the proposed increases. But I like the language, downsize. Rumsfeld talked about it all the time. Let's have a smaller and elite military and a fast-moving military. It never happened, and it didn't. But if we're going to do that, we have to downsize our foreign policy. We can't be the policeman of the world and downsize the military. I have proposed real cuts in the military budget. I don't want to cut one penny out of the defense budget, but you cannot equate military spending with defense because it's not the same. Matter of fact, military spending for bad reasons generally leads to a weaker defense, and we have to come to understand that if we're going to get it under control.
You were stressing caucus states, in particular Nevada, as right targets for your campaign. But at some point, don't you actually need to win a contest as opposed to coming in second, coming in third, even if you are pulling delegates out of these states, to make your campaign continue in a credible way?
Our goal is to win, and you win by getting maximum number of delegates. It's just, it's easier for us to compete by getting delegates, not to spend in states where it's winner take all in very big states. We get pretty good donations, but we don't have the hundreds of millions of dollars that others have. So we have to be wiser on our expenditures, and it's more competitive in a state like Nevada. I'm delighted that Nevada makes it fairer where we can come and compete for the vote. So that is why we're here. We're here to get delegates, and when we get the delegates and build up momentum, sure, we can win. But do I think it's not a major job? It is very major. But the goal is to get delegates. You get delegates so you can win.
This is more of a follow-up to the military spending question that was just raised about the Obama administration. Just continuing on those same lines, today it was announced that Defense Secretary Panetta is going to end the war in Afghanistan in 2013. Your biggest point of contention has been, obviously, foreign wars overseas. What do you think about this, and what's your response?
It's a great idea, and I'll believe it when I see it. it was announced many years ago that the war was over and that we had success in Iraq, and then the war started. And just recently, we said that we had left Iraq. Today, there's negotiations going on to send in more troops. But we have the drones all around Iraq. We're all over the Middle East. We're there, and we have created a monstrous of a problem over there. There was always a problem, but it's much worse because before we went into Iraq, we had there were no Al Qaeda. Now there's Al Qaeda there. The Christians have been pushed out, and the Sunnis have been humiliated. And now it's a country allied with the Iranians, and that's supposed to help us. So we're still in Iraq. We're going to be in Iraq. We're going to see troops back there unless we change the foreign policy. It's still assumed that we have this moral responsibility and we have the wealth that we can endlessly be the policemen of the world and start war after war. We better be, instead of daydreaming about bringing troops home in a year or so, what we ought to do is be talking about not sending any troops into Syria and not sending any bombs into Iran.
Hi, Dr. Paul. Part of your plan is to repeal taxes on tips for service industry workers and the like. Do you plan on introducing legislation to do that in 2 weeks when you go back to Washington, D.C.?
No, I've introduced that regularly, and I know we did it 4 years ago. I think we've kept it up with every year, and I'm almost absolutely certain it's already been introduced, but certainly it would be no problem. But I'm told that it has been introduced. I did it at the beginning of the year because there's a certain set of bills like that I introduce each and every year. So, thank you very much. Sure, yeah, that'd be nice. I guess if you haven't heard, our 55th wedding anniversary is today.
Well, this is quite a surprise. I didn't know I'd be part of the press conference, but I am glad to be here today, and it is exciting to celebrate 55 years of marriage, and I couldn't be happier. Ron's always done everything right, and I have to follow along because of that. So, and I thank you all for coming.
All right, everybody, that concludes the event. Thank you so much for coming. Ron and Carol are going to go celebrate their anniversary now. Thank you very much.